The Great Lakes of North America hold in their depths one of the densest ship cemeteries in the world. It is estimated that more than 6,000 shipwrecks rest beneath the waters of Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, many of them in a state of preservation that rivals the finest underwater archaeological sites on the planet. The near-zero temperatures at depth, the absence of strong marine currents, and the lack of organisms such as the shipworm, which in the oceans devours wood within a matter of years, have turned the Great Lakes into a natural cold storage chamber where vessels from the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries remain practically intact, in some cases with dishes still on the tables, bottles in the holds, and clothing in the cabins. What exploration teams have found in some of those holds has left researchers speechless. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. Let's begin. Lake Superior is the deepest and coldest of all, and also the one that concentrates some of the most important shipwrecks. Its waters reach 406 meters at the deepest point, and the temperature at the bottom hovers around 4 degrees Celsius throughout the year. Under those conditions, the process of decomposition is so slow that researchers from the Wisconsin Historical Society and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum have documented wrecks where the wood, although darkened by time, remains structurally solid after more than 150 years underwater. One of the most emblematic shipwrecks of the Great Lakes is that of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a 222-meter freighter that sank on the 10th of November of 1975 during a storm on Lake Superior, taking with it the 29 members of its crew. Although the Edmund Fitzgerald is the most famous and was explored on several occasions by remotely operated underwater vehicles, its story symbolizes the danger of these waters and the ease with which ships disappear in them without leaving immediate trace. But the most surprising findings in terms of preservation and hold contents come from much older wrecks. In 2018, a team of researchers from the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, located in the waters of Lake Huron in Michigan, using remotely operated vehicles equipped with high-definition cameras, located and documented the wreck of the Ironton, a steamship that sank in 1894. The images revealed that the hull was practically intact, with the deck covered in silt but structurally preserved, and in the cargo hold were found wooden barrels that still retained their original shape, along with pieces of industrial-era machinery and tools that had rested untouched for more than a century. The Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary was designated in 2000 precisely to protect the extraordinary concentration of shipwrecks in that area of Lake Huron. The sanctuary covers approximately 4,300 square kilometers and contains the remains of at least 100 sunken ships, ranging from 19th-century wooden vessels to 20th-century steel ships. The documentation work carried out there with submarine drone technology and high-resolution acoustic scanners has produced some of the most detailed wreck maps ever made in fresh water. In 2019, the same Thunder Bay Sanctuary team, in collaboration with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, carried out a systematic exploration of an area of the lake that had until then been little studied, in waters between 60 and 90 meters deep. Using an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle equipped with articulated arms, high-power LED lights, and stereoscopic cameras that allowed distances and dimensions to be calculated with precision, they found the wreck of a vessel that researchers identified as the Goshawk, a 2-masted brigantine that had disappeared in a storm in 1870. The state of preservation of the Goshawk was extraordinary. The main mast was still standing, tilted but without having collapsed. The rudder retained its original position, and when the ROV introduced its camera into the hatch of the cargo hold, what the researchers saw on the screens of the surface vessel left them in silence. The hold contained hundreds of clay tiles, carefully stacked just as they had been loaded in the port of origin more than 150 years earlier. The tiles had not scattered, had not disintegrated. They were exactly where the dock workers had placed them in 1870, waiting to arrive at a destination they never reached. That type of finding, apparently simple, has incalculable historical value. The tiles allowed researchers to trace 19th-century trade routes on the Great Lakes, identify pottery production centers of the era, and reconstruct the type of infrastructure being built in the growing cities of the region. Shipwrecks are not just tragedies. They are three-dimensional archives of the economic and everyday life of their time. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. One of the most extraordinary cases of cargo found in Great Lakes shipwreck holds involves the Westmoreland, a steamship that sank on the 7th of December of 1854 during a storm on Lake Michigan off the coast of the Door Peninsula. According to historical records of the era, the Westmoreland was carrying at the time of its sinking a cargo that included bottled whiskey, provisions, and according to some documents of the period, a quantity of gold coins destined for the workers of the lumber mills of northern Michigan. For decades, the supposed gold of the Westmoreland was considered a legend, a tavern story without real basis. However, when divers and later teams with ROVs located the remains of the Westmoreland in 1986 and documented them again in greater detail in subsequent explorations, they found that the part of the cargo unrelated to the alleged gold was in a surprisingly good state of preservation. The whiskey bottles, though some broken by the impact of the sinking, were still visible in the hold. Researchers from the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association documented the wreck extensively and confirmed that the historical records about the type of cargo were accurate in what could be verified visually. The question of the gold remains officially unresolved, but the period documents making reference to a shipment of coins are real and have been studied by historians from the University of Michigan. Further north, on Lake Superior, in 2021, a team of researchers from the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society carried out an expedition to document the wreck of the steamship Niagara, sunk in 1887. Using a side-scan sonar system and an exploration ROV, they generated the most complete three-dimensional model ever produced of that wreck, revealing that the cargo hold contained remains of agricultural machinery, locomotive parts, and, in the stern section, what researchers identified as a cargo of copper ingots from the mines of the Keweenaw Peninsula, which in the 19th century was the most important copper-producing region in the United States. The copper of Keweenaw has a history that extends much further back than the 19th century. The indigenous peoples of the region, particularly the Ojibwe and their ancestors, extracted and worked the native copper of that peninsula for at least 7,000 years, turning it into tools, weapons, and ritual objects that were traded through networks covering much of North America. The copper of the Great Lakes reached as far as Mexico and Florida. The wrecks of ships that transported that copper in the 19th century are, in a certain sense, the last chapter of a commercial history that began millennia earlier. The technology used today to explore those wrecks has advanced spectacularly in the last 15 years. The modern ROVs used in the Great Lakes can operate at depths of up to 600 meters, transmit high-definition video in real time, collect samples with precision manipulator arms, and generate three-dimensional point clouds using underwater laser scanning systems. NOAA and its partners have published the three-dimensional models of several wrecks from the Thunder Bay Sanctuary openly on the internet, allowing anyone in the world to virtually explore those ships in detail. But technological exploration has also generated tensions. The Great Lakes are divided among several American states and the Canadian province of Ontario, and each jurisdiction has its own laws on access to and recovery of objects from wrecks. In Michigan, a law of 1980 prohibits the removal of any object from historical wrecks in state waters without specific permission. However, wreck looting has been a persistent problem, with amateur divers who have removed irreplaceable objects of historical value. Systematic documentation through ROVs and the publication of digital models has also become a preservation tool, because by recording the current state of each wreck in detail, it can be detected when something has been removed. In 2022, researchers from the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary published the results of an exploration carried out with multi-hull acoustic mapping technology that for the first time systematically covered an area of 200 square kilometers of Lake Huron that had never been mapped in detail. The result was the discovery of 14 previously unknown shipwrecks, some of them of considerable size. One of them, provisionally identified from its dimensions and structural characteristics as a late 19th century steamship, had its hold completely sealed by sedimentation and the partial collapse of the deck. Researchers estimate that the interior could be in an exceptional state of preservation, but it has not yet been possible to introduce an ROV into the interior space without risk of damaging the structure. That situation perfectly summarizes the permanent dilemma of underwater archaeology in the Great Lakes. The best finds are precisely the most inaccessible, and access can imply damage. The ethics of wreck exploration have evolved enormously since the days when divers simply entered holds and took out what they found. Today, the international standards of UNESCO on underwater cultural heritage, adopted in 2001, establish that in situ conservation, that is, leaving objects where they are and simply documenting them, must be the preferred option whenever possible. The Great Lakes, with their thousands of shipwrecks in an extraordinary state of preservation, are one of the places in the world where that principle makes the most sense. There is something profoundly disturbing and at the same time hypnotic about the images that ROVs bring up from the depths of the lakes. A table set with intact crockery, a pair of leather boots next to a bunk, a corked wine bottle, objects that belong to real people who ate at that table, who wore those boots, who perhaps drank that wine the last night before the storm ended everything. The shipwrecks of the Great Lakes are archives of interrupted lives, preserved by the cold and the darkness with a fidelity that no museum could replicate. Leave your like, subscribe, and share. Until next time.